G'day guys, my name's Carl. Today I'm going to talk about changing the bearings on your Lowrance Ghost. Typically the lower bearing, so this one in here, mine was collapsed. I've already changed it, but I had a few guys already asked me about how I went about doing it. So I'm just going to I'm going to pull it apart, get to the point where I have to change the bearing and then put it back together. A few things that you're going to need to do this task is obviously the bearing kit. When you order the bearing kit, just make sure it comes with two bearings, two bearing C-clips and a new shaft seal, and you'll see why on that one. You're going to need some torque screws. That's just to take all the screws out, some heat shrink, two zip ties, two small zip ties, some cutters and some Allen keys. All right, let's get into it. So first step's going to be with your torque screw, taking these two out. Once they're out, I'll use a flat blade screwdriver in this. I know I didn't mention it, but you just sort of got to get the clips undone from this bottom cover and the top cover. Just be careful not to damage them. Just a nice light pressure just to get them undone. Oh, that slides off. I would recommend getting a whole bunch of little containers and putting all the screws in, or putting the screws with the parts that you remove. Next one is with a slightly bigger torque, taking all of these ones out the whole way around. I grabbed the wrong size. I did grab the wrong size. Also use one of these ducks, as long as you're careful. hard for me because one, there's a bit of glare outside. But okay, so all of them are done. Don't lose them. Manually take them out now. Don't lose them like I am. Cool, the top cover is going to come off. Right, part of that top cover is going to be this protective rubber bit. Just have a quick inspect of that, make sure there's no debris or anything in there. Cool, now that's off, we've got the PCM board. So on this you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to undo, as well as taking this one off, being these two, and then all these just clips. Just be careful when you're taking that off. This is pretty much the brains of the trolling motor, and you don't really want to break that. That could get expensive. Before I start mixing up all my screws, I'm going to get all the ones that I just took off from the top cover. I'm going to throw it into the top cover itself. Don't break that. So my screws are on. I'm now going to put all the screws from the PCM board on the rubber one. Just be very careful, you don't want to knock any of these little chip microprocessors or any of the stuff off the circuit board off. So just be very careful when throwing your screwdriver around. Things to note when putting this one back together is one of these screws was different, being this guy here. The one on the top that goes into the casing, the rest sort of go into a bit of plastic. It's got a different thread, so you know which one it is. Right, so they're all off. Now you're just going to be careful, just to pull it off carefully. Right, and then start unplugging all of these. And some of these have little clips on them that you've got to push in to unclip. Just the one left. One or two. Cool. PCM board's off. Put that aside. Now, with these, just sort of try and keep them out of the way and sort of in the place. You'll notice there's 2 zip ties here. You've got this panel here to take off, which is 3 more screws, and we can take this one off because we're going to have to take this plastic casing off anyway. So back onto the screwdriver. I'll put that away so I don't keep using it. I think that's the GPS unit, this one. the side. Again, be careful with it. Now we'll take the plate off. This goes back to the little screws. I should also mention before start doing this, make sure the battery's isolated, so it's not running any power through your electric motor at the time. Right, little plate off, put him over there, screws next to him. Cool. Now we're at the plastic part, but prior to doing the plastic part, what we need to do is clip these two zip ties, one here, one here, right, and on here, actually push it in frame, the ones here, so your power cables actually have quick disconnects underneath some heat shrink, so just cut the heat shrink off carefully without cutting the actual power cables. Alright, so carefully the zip ties. 1, 2, and then I forgot to mention the Stanley knife. Lucky I have one here, and just carefully cut the heat shrink off. Alright, very carefully. You don't want to cut the electrical cables, you just want to cut the heat shrink. Cool. So now we've exposed the two power connectors. You can just unclick them; they just pull apart, which is makes doing this job quite easy. All right, all the cables are free. We've got to disconnect your sonar or transducer cable, which is, you'll see it's just a twist plug. And what I will do is I'll get some tape and I'll tape these together. So when I pull the shaft out the bottom, all these cables stay together and you're not going to pull this plug off and damage it in any way, shape or form. So as I said, I'm going to get some black tape. You can do it now, you can do it later. I just want to protect those cables so we don't pull that connection off when we pull the shaft out. Just to protect all that cabling. All right, now we can take the plastic plate off. Just utilising some more torque screw pieces, or the torque screw. Cool, now that they're all out, I'm going to carefully take the plastic part out, not to snag any of the actual wires. Just give it a little wiggle. The bottom of this plate's actually in a bearing on one of the cogs, so you just got to be sort of work it out of that bearing just nice and slowly. And that's a separate bearing, so that's this guy, and it generally stays in that cog there. Yeah, so it generally stays inside that cog there. I'll try and put him back in without putting him in sideways. There we go, he's back in. Cool, now the plate's off. I'll get the screws from that plate, I'll put it in there so we don't lose them. We know what they're for. And I'll put that aside. Hey bud. Hey. You're right. I'm just recording the video. You're right. Let's wait for the truck to go away. All right, now that plastic plate's off, I'll put it aside. We're looking at taking off the rubber belts, this cog, followed by this cog, and then we can look at the shaft. So what I'll do for this one first is I'm going to loosen, wrong way, I'll loosen this nut on the outside. Where are you? There you are. So I'll loosen this one, and that just applies a little bit of tension onto the actual motor itself, and then I can take that the belt off. So Allen key, take him out. He's got a little rubber grommet on him, so don't lose that. And now we can take out take the belt off just by sliding it off. Put him aside. That cog will just pull straight out. And now we can look at sliding this tiny belt off. This one's quite small, so just pay extra care on this one. Yeah, you just slide him off one end and then he's off. You can take that off just to get him out of the way if you want, but you don't realistically need to take that one off. Cool, now we're at the big cog. Again, back into the torque screw. All the way out. There's two of these ones. They come out, and obviously I would have taken note of the two arrows. So there's an arrow on this one and there's an arrow on this little one that sits here. Right, when you put the belt on, just take note of which way they're pointing. Because my trolling motor is pointed prop in, it makes this point in, so that lines up with where the prop is on the shaft. So these two torque screws out. Now you can remove that bigger cog. It'll just come off. So that's the collar for the top of the shaft, just in there. Right, there's a shaft seal and the bearing in there. So the next step, what you're going to have to do is coming down the front of your trolling motor, right, is actually undo this one. Alright, so if I sit you there, you're going to stay there. Yeah, it looks like it. You just want to loosen this collar off. Righty tighty, lefty loosey collar. Alright, just loosen off so you can actually slide that shaft down a touch, because you actually need to slide the shaft up to remove the top one. Right, so now that's loose, this shaft will slide further in. Right, and the top of the shaft is actually slidden out. You can see the top bearing just in there, right, and the bearing C-collar is sitting at the top. Because I've already done my bearings and I don't want to take the shaft out, all you do from here now is remove this top collar, again with your Allen key, right, 2 Allen keys, one there, and take that collar completely off. From that, it will let you remove the shaft completely, and then you can replace the bottom shaft straight onto the shaft, put it back on, and put it back in. The tricky part you will have is when you're refitting the top bearing, and behind the top bearing is the shaft seal. Right. Looks like this. There's a little seal in the middle of it. That goes behind that top bearing. And the easiest way I found to get the shaft back in without pushing this out is put a little bit of marine grease on here, just the tiniest bit, just to lubricate the shaft coming through the seal. And you don't want to rip the seal because it obviously keeps water out of the top of the unit. I put the shaft's not in, the shaft's completely removed. I put the seal in, and then I get the top bearing and I actually put the top bearing back in, and that's going to stop this shaft from being pushed out when I push the shaft back in. And that's quite tricky by yourself. So if you've got a kid or something that can help you with this, or your wife, get them to come out and give you a hand to do this part. So as they're putting the shaft back in, you just want to sort of hold the top of the bearing as the shaft's coming through, and that's going to stop the bearing from falling back out, and then obviously the shaft seal also falling out with it. So once you've installed the bottom bearing, shaft's back on, top bearings in, shaft seals in, you can then go back to replacing the collar back on, and you can't screw this one up. There's like a lining up hole and pin on this collar. It'll only go on one way. It's just a matter of just putting it on. From there you can push this all over back in. Make sure you push it all the way back in so that top C-collar actually goes into the top of that bearing, and then doing the same on your bottom. So we're back down the bottom where the bottom bearing is. The bottom bearing is in this little collar, so we need to make sure that it goes back into this collar all the way. All right, you've got your C collar for your bearing. All right, make sure he goes in there properly. Right, and then pushing this other clamp up against that. Make sure the shaft doesn't slide back up when you tighten this one up. Try and tighten these ones up evenly. Cool, bottom collar's on. collar's on, top collar's done up, we can literally now reverse the process. So obviously when you feed the shaft back up through the middle, you just got to be careful of your cables, and that's why I taped them together to feed them back up through the shaft seal and the bearing. Once that's back up through the top, then I'm going to leave that tape on until I put the plastic collar back on, then untape it and zip tie it back in place. So from here, reverse process, like I said, starting with your little cog. There's a little sliding mechanism on the back. That's your travel stop for your foot pedal. It doesn't matter where it goes. As long as your arrow is pointing in the same direction as your prop, it will bolt up nicely. Feeding through the cable. This has got keyholes on the cog as well, so it will only line up the one way. Right, so you just got to fiddle with it a little bit until it lines up. So if you look at it, actually, if you look at the back of it, it's got all these grooves, and then on the top of this collar, it's also got those grooves. So those grooves will line up with these grooves, and now we're all grooving. It's in place. Grab your torque screws, screw it in place. There's me right in front of me. Right, again, tighten these evenly. You pull one side out before the other. It might misalign the holes, so you can't screw it in properly. So even if you put them in and screw them up so they're both in before you tighten them. Cool, that bad boy's on. Now we can go back to putting belts on and cogs back in. So the first one I'll do is I'll do the little belt with the little cog. Right, lining the two arrows up like I showed you before. So they're pointing at each other like that. And then just carefully, so what I'll do is I'll put it on the back of the little cog. Right, making sure she's still lined up. I'll carefully put the little belt back on, like so. Now we've got the bigger cog with the bearing in it. Just make sure that bearing in the casing is pushed in nicely. Bearing in the back of the cog's pushed in nicely. That will just keyhole into that. There's no lining tools, but that lines up with the gear on the cog that you just put back in. Over the motor, and then slide it onto the wheel carefully. Like that. Now you're going to replace the tension bolt for the motor. Right, give it a little bit of tension. Just make sure she's not too tight, because the last thing you want to do is snap it and have to take it all apart again. From here we can get our plastic piece, take all the screws out of him. Alright, it goes on this way, so this little pin goes into that bearing, and all the cabling comes through the middle. And just be careful you're not going to trap any of the connectors or little cables in with the plastic. So just carefully place them back on. You might need to give them a bit of a wiggle. And you don't want to trap any of the wires or any of that. So just push them back into place. Grab your screws and then start doing your screws up. Right. If you forget which ones they are on the plastic, It's actually got little markings to show you this one, this one, this one, this one, that one, that one, that one, and that one. So little arrows above it or next to it that show you which holes screws actually go into. Same thing, I'm just going to do it up to a point, I'm not going to tighten it all the way. I'm just going to get all of them to a point where they're all in, and then I'll just tighten them after that. Over there. Give them a quick torque. Don't want to over tighten them, you don't want to strip them, you don't want to break the plastic. Just tighten enough that they're not going to back out. Cool, plastic plates back in place. Now we can undo the tape that we put on earlier. Just careful pulling the tape off, you don't want to pull that connection off with the tape after you just tried to protect it. Cool, I found doing the transducer cable first easier, so just plug it in and make sure she's locked, twist and locked it, so it's not going to disconnect on you. You grab one of your little zip ties and it just goes through these little things where you cut them off. They just sort of sit through there. If I can get it in there. Go the other way. There we go. From there, I look for where the zip tie was sitting before. That way you can get this to sit nicely. And zip tie it up. So it sits in that little channel just here. There's a little channel that they sit in, so that it protects it. So yeah, just zip tie them in place, make it look tidy. Cool, snippers. Second zip tie, this one, it comes through this little channel and rests up here, and your zip ties from in this little one in there. If you can get it where the previous zip tie was, you know it's going to be in the right location. Cool. Now you're going to find your heat shrink that we had earlier. This one. And what I actually did is I found the old one, I measured it, and then cut it to suit. The scissors I had prepared earlier. So you know that's going to be long enough. So what I'll do is I'll just slide him on. black to black. Can't screw it up. And then slide the heat shrink over the connection and make sure it's got even on both sides. And let's see if I've got enough for this one. Nope. They're both black to original. I don't have any black left, but I've got red, so that's going to work for me. Plug it back in. Slide the heat shrink over top so it's even. Right, and then get your heat gun, or if you're careful, a lighter. Heat gun, and just carefully add a little bit of heat to shrink that heat shrink up so it's water sealed. Right, I'm trying not to heat any of the other stuff up, just being careful with it. Doesn't need much. Right, just check the ends of those, make sure it's all sealed up nicely so any water doesn't get in there. And now we can just push this back into the casing, following this little channel here, and then we'll get that plate and put back over top of it, and that sort of holds it all in. Like that. It's nice around this, pushed in nice and tight, and then we get the plate to put back on. Plate goes back on, screws. Now this one's the 3 metal screw holes, just so you remember. Now I found it easier to look at doing the middle one first. Sort of holds the plate in the right location. And you can get the other screws and do them up. Tighten everything up. Cool. Next one will be putting the GPS back on. That goes on up here, with the cables facing back towards the center of the thing. So if you see the cables, they face back that way. Those are screws. Cool, this thing can go click back into there. Now it's time for the PCM board. Not this guy, put this one back on. I found it easier to do all the connections across the top first. There it is there, I thought I was missing one then. So all the connections across the top first. Make sure they all click back in. Get a nice audible click, and they go on the right way. bottom, one's on this side. Pretty sure all these little clips are keywayed, so you can't put them on the wrong way. But don't force it. If it's not going on, don't force it. Now, all your screws for your PCM board. Remembering there's one different, so just take note of which one you've picked up. Line it up. And same thing, don't over torque this because you will break it and then you will have to get a new PCM board. So what I'll do is I'll actually put them in loose and then go back through and just give them a little tighten. I won't over tighten this. If you forgot which ones are, PCM's actually got little indicators on it like that show you which screw holes to put them in. Right, as I said at the start, there's one that's different. Not sure if that's going to focus. It's a finer thread and it's a smaller shaft of the screw, so you know which one goes into the top one at the top here. It's also metal and it's got a different torque screw on top of it. It's slightly smaller. This is where you can go back through and just give everything a quick tighten. Don't over tighten it. As I said, you don't want to break the board, but you don't want it loose either. So before you continue, you can actually now go turn it on. If you do choose to turn it on and test everything, try not to touch any of that. The last thing you want to do is earth something out and fry your board. But given that you've done everything right and you haven't broken a circuit chip off or anything like that, it should be okay. And now go back into putting all these on. You can put this back in the top and put it back on, or you can just sit it on like this. Making sure all the cables are pushed in nice and neat and they're not hanging out. Top back on. When you do that, just make sure you're not crimping any of that rubber seal. Right, and then just go through, put all your screws back in, and that's job done. That's, you know, apart from obviously the bottom case, but that's another 2 screws. Just clip it on, put your 2 screws in. That's changing a bearing on a Lowrance Ghost. Thanks for watching, guys. If you have any questions, hit us up.